Frankenstein, Chapter 1. I was born in Geneva, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. After their wedding, my parents visited Italy, Germany, and France. I, their eldest child, was born at Naples. I remained for several years their only child, even though my mother had much desired to have a daughter too. When I was about 5 years old, my mother, accompanied by me, visited a house of poor people to give help. We found a peasant and his wife distributing a scanty meal to 5 hungry babies. Among these, there was one which attracted my mother far above all the rest. Her hair was the brightest gold, and despite the poverty of her clothing, seemed to set a crown of distinction on her head. Her brow was clear and ample. Her blue eyes, her lips, and the molding of her face were so expressive of sweetness that none could behold her without seeing a celestial stamp in all her features. The peasant woman told us her history. She was not her child, but the daughter of a Milanese nobleman. Her mother was a German and had died on giving her birth. My mother asked for guardians to yield their charge to her. They were fond of the sweet orphan. Her presence had seemed a blessing to them. But it would be unfair to her to keep her in poverty and want when Providence afforded her such powerful protection. They consulted their village priest, and the result was that Elizabeth Lavanza was brought to my house and became more than sister, the beautiful and adored companion of all my occupations and my pleasures. Everyone loved Elizabeth. On the evening previous to her being brought to my home, my mother had said playfully, "I have a pretty present for my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it." And when she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally and looked upon Elizabeth as mine to protect and love. We called each other familiarly by the name of cousin. She was more than sister to me. Till death she was to be mine only. Chapter 2. We were brought up together. I need not say that we were strangers to any species of disunion or dispute. At school, I was rather indifferent to my schoolfellows in general, but I united myself in the bonds of the closest friendship to one among them, Henry Clerval. He was deeply read in books of chivalry and romance. No human being could have passed a happier childhood than myself. My parents were possessed by the very spirit of kindness and indulgence. It was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn, and whether it was the outward substance of things or the inner spirit of nature and the mysterious soul of man that occupied me, my inquiries were directed to be metaphysical, or in its highest sense, the physical secrets of the world. Natural philosophy is the genius that has regulated my fate. When I was 13 years of age, we all went on an excursion to Thonon. The inclemency of the weather obligated us to remain confined to the inn. In this house, I chanced to find a volume of the works of Cornelius Agrippa. I opened it with apathy, the theory which he attempts to demonstrate, and the wonderful facts which he relates soon changed this feeling into enthusiasm. A new light seemed to dawn upon my mind. When I was about 15, we witnessed a most violent thunderstorm. I remained while the storm lasted, watching its progress with curiosity and delight. As I stood at the door, on a sudden I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak which stood about 20 yards from our house. And so soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared and nothing remained. When we visited in the next morning, we found the tree entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. I never beheld anything so utterly destroyed. Somehow, it was a token. Destiny was too potent, and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction. Chapter 3. When I was 17, my parents resolved that I should become a student at the University of Ingolstadt. My departure was therefore fixed at an early date. But before the day resolved upon could arrive, my mother sickened. Her fever was accompanied by the most alarming symptoms. On her deathbed, she joined the hands of Elizabeth and myself. "My children," she said, "my firmest hopes of future happiness were placed on the prospect of your union. This expectation will now be the consolation of your father." Eventually, the day of my departure arrived. When I got to Ingolstadt, I delivered my letters of introduction and paid a visit to some of the principal professors. When my lessons started, I went into the lecturing room, which M. Waldman entered shortly after. After having made a few preparatory experiments, he concluded with a panegyric upon modern chemistry. Such were the professor's words, and soon my mind was filled with one thought. So much has been done. More, far more will I achieve. I will unfold to the world the deepest mysteries of creation. On the same day, I paid M. Waldman a visit. He heard with attention the little narration concerning my studies. "I'm happy," said M. Waldman, "to have gained a disciple, and if your application equals your ability, I have no doubt of your success." He then took me into his laboratory and explained to me the uses of his various machines. And thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny. Chapter 4. My application gained strength as I proceeded and soon became so ardent and eager that the stars often disappeared in the light of morning whilst I was yet engaged in my laboratory. 2 years passed in this manner, during which I paid no visit to Geneva. I was engaged heart and soul in the pursuit of some discoveries which I hoped to make. One of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, whence I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? To examine the causes of life, we must first research death. I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I spent a long time examining and analyzing the change from life to death and death to life, until from the midst of the darkness a sudden light broke in upon me. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I became more capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. Although I possessed the capacity of bestowing animation, I had to prepare a frame for the reception of it. So then I began the creation of a human being. I resolved to make the being of a gigantic stature, that is to say about 8 feet in height, and proportionally large. After having spent some months in collecting and arranging my materials, I began. The summer months passed while I was thus engaged, heart and soul, in the pursuit. Sometimes I grew alarmed at the wreck I perceived that I had become. The energy of my purpose alone sustained me.